All right. Hello, everyone. We're back. I hope everybody's feeling refreshed after that awesome stretching session that we just got to do. And so we are now ready for our last speaker of the day. Her name is Dr. Tamara Lawless. Dr. Lawless is a water conservation manager for the City of Flagstaff, Arizona, but she comes from Wisconsin originally, where her love for environmental conservation began. She enjoys spending time doing lots of fun outdoor activities like mountain biking, kayaking, and running very slowly. And that's her own admission. So thank you so much for speaking to us today, Dr. Lawless. And you can go ahead and come on, share your camera, share your microphone. There you are. Hello.
Hello.
Okay, you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Will do. See it?
I do.
All
Okay.
right, let me get my slides up. Okay,
All right.
Get started.
Looks good. Stage is all yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. As she said, I'm Tamara Lawless, and I'm the Water Conservation Manager in City of Flagstaff in Arizona. And I'm going to give you a little information about Flagstaff's water conservation program, Saving Water in the Mountains of Arizona. So if you don't know anything about Flagstaff, one of the first things that I want to mention is that we are at 7,000 feet of elevation. We are one of the highest elevation cities in the United States. The only actual city, so 25,000 people or bigger, that is higher than us is Santa Fe, and they're just higher by a few hundred feet. So we are up there. When I moved here, I felt out of breath for months. The annual precipitation that we get here is 23 inches, and that's notable because Arizona on a whole is quite dry. The average in Arizona is only 8 inches. So Flagstaff and the mountains to the eastern part of the state called the White Mountains are the two wettest areas of the state, but 23 inches is still pretty arid, so water conservation is definitely key. We have around 75,000 people that live up here, and 30,000 of those are students at the local university, Northern Arizona University. So that's another interesting challenge when we think about water conservation, because it tends to be a bit of a transient population. People are sometimes here only for the 4 years that they're at school. And so trying to get that message to them during that time takes a lot of partnership with the local university. We've had a water conservation ordinance here in Flagstaff since 1988. And part of that ordinance established every other day watering. So people with even addresses water on different days than people with odd addresses, and nobody waters on Mondays. Interestingly, that piece of the ordinance was supposed to only be enacted if we had to go into stage 1 water restrictions. And that's based on, our daily production and being able to meet our peak demand. And that occurred in the early 2000s. And so we had to, essentially turn on the every other day watering. And people were totally thrown off and very confused. And it was really hard to get the message out about the every other day. And so after that water crisis was over, the city's leadership said, okay, that was too confusing. Let's just do every other day watering all the time. So we essentially removed the clause that said that we only had to do it, if our peak demand was being exceeded by our production. And so we've been doing that since 2003, the every other day watering. And my staff actually has a team that drives around our town during the summertime and looks for people that are watering on the wrong day or watering at the wrong time, because another piece of the ordinance is that there's no irrigation between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. And we have sort of a nice escalating to firm to a fine type of interaction with the public when we have conversations about irrigating on the wrong day or at the wrong time. So the first time we catch them are really friendly. We give them a magnet and a little bag of goodies, and then we give them a warning, and then we start putting a fine on their water bill. So we have the ability to actually put a $25 fine on their bill, and it can escalate to double every time they get in trouble after that. But usually people after 1 or 2 interactions are on the schedule. We also have 1.28 gallon per flush toilets in Flagstaff. The rest of the state is just on the federal standard of 1.6. I heard that Texas actually does 1.28 statewide, which is very impressive. We also have a local code for pint flush urinals. In terms of our water supply, we do about 30% surface water and 70% groundwater. Surface water is much, much more affordable for us. We have a small reservoir south of town that we can treat. Our wells in this part of the country have to be dug very, very deep. Some of ours are over 1,500 feet deep. And so it's very, very expensive for us to pump that water out of the ground. So as much as we can rely on our surface water supply, that's much better for us. I also wanted to note that we have a gravity-fed sewer system, and it's not combined with our stormwater system. And that is sometimes an issue with conservation because Flagstaff has been doing a pretty good job at lowering our water consumption. We've actually mostly held production steady since the late 80s, in spite of the fact that our population has grown considerably. And so, you know, the staff that run the water treatment plants sometimes get in a clash with me and say, you're doing too much conservation because our gravity-fed pipes they're slowing down. We've got some slow flows in the system, and that can cause corrosion and areas of stagnancy. So that's one of the challenges that we face into the future as we continue to do a really good job at water conservation. One of the things that I wanted to highlight today was our water conservation strategic plan, which we just finished here in 2020. We worked with Medaus Water Management. They're a firm in California you've probably heard of that does a lot of work in conservation planning. And one of the very interesting, for a water conservation nerd, parts of this process is that you build a model that helps you quantify the water savings of your water conservation efforts. So when we built the model, we had a bunch of inputs that we put in, including our historic consumption, our historic production, things like weather trends and what our economy was doing over time and how our building codes have changed over time. And after you kind of build it, you can put in a bunch of pieces for each of your water conservation actions, such as how many people participate in it and how long do we plan to do that action. And it'll spit out how much water you're going to save and how much money it costs you to do that thing. So by assessing all of the water conserving actions that we are currently doing and looking at ones that we were interested in doing in the future, we were able to revise and improve our water conservation program so that we are getting the optimal savings for the amount of money that we're putting in and the amount of staff time that we're putting in. So after we, built the model, put all the inputs in, there were a few changes that we decided to make. The first one is that we are going to make a big change in our rain barrel program. So we have been doing for a few years a program where we go and get barrels from a local ice cream cone manufacturer, and we recycle them and convert them into rain barrels. And it's a bit of a laborious process because the barrels have soy lecithin in them, and so they're a little sticky when we get them from the ice cream cone manufacturer. And so my staff were spending time going and picking up the barrels and then kind of rinsing them and letting them ferment in the sun for a while to get the goo out. And then they were taking the goo that was fermented and they were bringing it to the university where we were composting the goo. And then my staff were drilling out a hole for a hose spigot and adding that and then teaching a workshop. So it's just a lot of steps. And, when we looked at it in the model, you probably already know that, rain barrels don't tend to save a lot of water already. And then we were putting all this staff time to the program, and it just showed that we were just, really not doing ourselves any favors by putting all these hours into these barrels and then giving them away to the public for free. So we're essentially completely rehashing that program and figuring out, are there ways that we can save a ton of staff time or just give the barrels to a local nonprofit who can sell them for a small fee? So we're essentially, put that whole program on hold, and COVID, has actually helped us a little bit in that way because we're able to say, oh, sorry, a bunch of our programming is on hold while we make some of these big decisions. And so that's one of the big changes that we're making. We also are changing our rebate program for toilets. So our consultant, Medaus Water Management, pointed out that we we're giving people money just to meet our city code. So if they turned in a toilet or, retrofitted a toilet that was from the 80s, which there are still plenty of in our community, we were giving them a rebate, and they were just going to the 1.28 gallon per flush to meet our city code. And our consultant pointed out, that there was going to be a lot of native conversion anyway, because a lot of these older toilets were no longer functioning, and then people had to meet the local code anyway. So we were just essentially paying them to follow the law. And they encouraged us to change our rebate program to only incentivize people who are going to exceed our local code. So now they can only get a financial incentive if they get a premium efficiency or a gallon a flush or lower, instead of just meeting our code. We've also decided to add a few programs. So we are going to do more school retrofits, both K-12 and higher education. For the K-12 schools that we're going to do retrofits in, we're not requiring any financial match. You may know that Arizona is one of the most poorly funded education systems in the country. I think we're like 48 out of 50. So we're not requiring the K-12 schools to contribute to those retrofits. We also put money in that budget for working with our local university and local community college. And for them, we're expecting like a 50-50 match. So we have $10,000 a year that we put aside for that, and we would expect them to match with at least $10,000 for retrofits. We're also going to do water budgeting for large irrigated lawns. So the hope is that we'll work with some of our parks and rec spaces, athletic fields, some of the fields at the schools, both higher ed and K-12, and to try to build water budgets for the appropriate amount of water that should be applied to those landscapes, keeping in mind our weather trends and our evapotranspiration rates, and trying to make sure that we're not, applying 2, 3, 4 times the amount of water to those spaces that's actually needed. The other one I wanted to highlight is that we also put aside a little bit of money for an innovation fund, and that's for us to test new technologies, such as we have a few golf courses in town. And some of the golf courses in the southern part of our state are doing programs where their customers are wearing a little GPS unit and seeing which parts of the green are actually being actively used and which parts essentially never get visited, and converting those areas over to native plants. So those types of interesting projects we would be funding from this innovation fund that we created. We also, by picking these new activities and refining some of our previous activities, the model told us that we should expect $160 million in deferred costs over the 20-year period of the modeling effort. So the model that we built goes from 2020 to 2040. And most of those deferred costs come from avoiding having to develop an additional water supply. So we anticipate that at some point in our community, we're either going to have to build a pipeline to bring in groundwater from east of Flagstaff, and that would be quite expensive, not just building the pipeline, but pumping it uphill, because we're kind of an island high spot with lower elevations around us. We'll either have to invest in something like that, or we'll have to invest in advanced treatment so that we can be using our reclaimed water as potable water. And both of those would be huge expenditures. So conservation really allows us the ability to push that investment down the road, and that helps us save a lot of money. We also expect to see a decrease of approximately 20 gallons per person per day because of our revised conservation plan. And a lot of that is outdoors through activities that we're doing outdoors. So hopefully that will, get the treatment guys to stop giving me too much sass about water conservation, because, the outdoor water use is not affecting the pipes at all. I also wanted to highlight our low water landscape rebate program. So we revitalized this program a few years ago. We weren't getting a lot of participation, and so we decided to try to make it more user-friendly for people. And one of the things that we did was partner with our local arboretum at Flagstaff to create custom plant lists for different areas of our town. Because we are a mountainous region, we have a lot of microclimates in our town. And so they created these plant lists for different neighborhoods to show people, here's the type of soil that you have in this part of town. Here's the amount of precipitation that you can expect. You can see there's a little highlight here showing, you know, what the little lists looked like. So this is for one of our neighborhoods that tends to be a little bit warmer and drier, a little bit more deserty. We also created a calculation tool that would help them select, you know, I'm putting in a shrub, it is this size, it's going to mature this much, and how much water it would need on an annual basis, so that they can compare that to their current water consumption in their lawn to make sure that they're actually going to save water and that it's worth our investment too, to pay for them to get the rebate. We offer 25 cents per square foot converted. There are a few rules. We don't allow for artificial turf, although if they wanted to convert some of their space to artificial turf, we just wouldn't count that in the total calculation that they're going to get rebated. They can't have any more than 20% rock cover, so they can't just get rid of their grass and pour down a bunch of gravel and call it done. And they can't put in a spray irrigation system, but they can have drip if they want. It's very challenging in our town for people to have in-ground irrigation systems because we, you know, as I said, we're very high elevation. We actually got 4 inches of snow 2 days ago. So the ground is currently covered in snow, but during the days, again, we're going to be coming back up into the 40s or even the 50s. And so we have what they say, like record levels of freeze-thaw cycles. Our ground freezes and thaws sometimes every day for months at a time. And that can really wreak havoc on pipes that are buried, you know, not deep enough to avoid those freeze-thaw cycles. And so leaks in irrigation systems are extremely common. So we really encourage people not to put them in here if they can avoid it. The reason we're avoiding doing more than 20% rock is because we're a high elevation town. 85% of our homes do not have air conditioning here in Flagstaff, including my home. So if you surround your house in rock, you're going to create like a small heat island, and you're really going to be suffering during the few weeks that we have hot weather in the summertime. It's also an aesthetic component too. A lot of people think if we say, oh, we're encouraging low water landscapes, they think of just a rockscape and they say, oh, that's looks terrible. I don't want that in our town. And so we want people to see that low water landscapes can be beautiful and that they can provide habitat for birds and insects and can still thrive on very little water. There are a lot of wonderful native plants that are adapted to this landscape that can do fine with minimal or no irrigating. I also wanted to highlight our commercial partnerships. So over the past few years, we have been running a WaterWise business certification program. So we work with a business, and the criteria that we ask them to meet is that they fix all of their active leaks. You would be surprised how many businesses have a leaking faucet or a running toilet that they just are not getting to because it's not a priority. We ask that their toilets and urinals flush at the federal standard as a minimum, so the 1.6 or 1.0 gallon per flush respectively. If they have fixtures that are operating at higher than that, then they have to meet the local code when they retrofit. So they can't retrofit down to a 1.6. They have to go all the way down to the 1.28 local code. We make sure that they have an aerator on every faucet based on the faucet's primary use. So if it's, you know, a kitchen faucet, we're not going to make them go down to a 0.5 or something, but we do want to see a flow control device on every faucet. And if they do have outdoor landscaping, which is somewhat uncommon for businesses in our town, we ask that they do incorporate a water budget that we would work with them on. And you can see once they've complied with our requirements, in the image there, we give them a framed picture of their water savings annually. They also get a window cling, and we promote them on our social media, on the city's webpage, and through our Convention and Visitors Bureau, which is part of the city government as well. If they want to go above and beyond and do more than just the items that we've requested, they can also do upgrades or rebates, and we will rebate up to 50% of fixture costs. We don't do labor. I also wanted to highlight that we recently were added to the Alliance for Water Efficiency's leaderboard. So our city council, over the past few years, 2017 to 2019, they pick, 10 goals for them to work on an annual basis. And for 2 years, their goal was for Flagstaff to become a national leader in water conservation. And so, our team had to figure out, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a national leader? And one of the things that we knew we really wanted to do was to meet the elements of the leaderboard and to get recognized and added to it. So if you are not familiar with the Alliance for Water Efficiency's leaderboard, it's based on the American Water Works Association's G480 standard of best practices in water conservation. And it's essentially just a worksheet that you fill out, you look at the criteria, and you explain how you are meeting that criteria or how you plan to meet it, and provide some information and documents to support your claims. I put, a small screenshot of ours there. And I wanted to highlight a few of the elements that are critical to that plan, although there are more if you decide to pursue it. But you have to have dedicated water conservation staff. So we have 2 full-time staff and 3 to 4 part-time staff. You have to have a water conservation plan. So luckily we're just wrapping up our strategic planning process when we applied. You have to treat conservation as equal to other supplies in your long-term planning efforts. So we have, a water resources master plan, and conservation has to be in that plan. And you have to, we did a lot of quantification of our conservation efforts through our strategic plan. So that was actually really helpful for integrating it into our water resources master plan. You have to have a program that does public information and education. You have to meter all of your service connections. You have to have a non-promotional water rate, so you can't, give people a discount if they use more water. You have to have water efficient codes and standards in your city code, and you have to do an annual water audit and water loss control program. And that final one is actually the area that we are lacking the most. We're really trying to build that water loss control program and to do more for our annual water audit. And so there are 3 levels. There's bronze, gold, and platinum. So we got gold because we are still working on our water loss control program, but we're very pleased with that. We're excited to be listed on the leaderboard. We're the first Arizona water utility to get on. And so we're excited, and maybe someday if we can get a hold of that annual water audit and water loss control program, we'll be able to get up to platinum level. So that's my big overview of Flagstaff's water conservation program. We do other things that I didn't highlight, and if you have questions about those or questions about what I did highlight, I'd be happy to answer them. I also listed my email address there in case you want to follow up with a more detailed question in the future. So
Great.
I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lawless. We do already have a question for you here. Just a reminder to the audience, if you do have a question for her, go ahead and enter it in the question and answer box. All right, so our first question for today is for those landscape rebates. Is there a methodology to preserve the water efficient landscaping changes if the home is then sold to another person?
That's a great question. Yeah, we actually did an analysis of our rebates from the past when we were doing the revitalization of it, and found, I think, 2 homes that had converted back to grass. And we have not established, so I think, Nevada does like an easement essentially where you cannot convert in the future. And we haven't done that because Arizona is pretty reluctant to do those kinds of things. So still up in the air. Yeah, there's still a possibility that we could pay it out, and then someone in the future could put it back.
Right. Okay. All right. And then kind of 2 questions that sort of go together. So what program in Flagstaff saves the most water? And then what is the most widely used by your residents?
Okay. Well, I think, as many of you know, changes in your code are going to save you the most water, and they cost almost nothing other than maybe some irritation by people when they have to make the change. And so one of the items that's on our wish list in our strategic plan for the future is to get a local code for water sense labeled fixtures, shower heads, and faucets. Along with the toilets. I didn't mention that our toilet rebates have to be water sense approved. And so, that I think would be a huge savings if we could get that through. In terms of what gets the most use, I mean, our general education and outreach, I mean, we do direct outreach to thousands of people every year. We do lots of public events. We actually, at those public events, we have a fixture giveaway. So we give away shower heads and aerators just by the bucket. So I would say that's probably the thing that people use the most. And then second to that would have been our previous toilet rebate program. But now that we've made it a little harder for people, I think the participation in that is going to drop off some.
Okay, great. All right, looks like we have another question. Back to the landscape rebate question, two reverted back to turf. What about the percentage of your total rebates? Does that represent? So what does that to represent out of all of the ones that you did, I guess?
Yeah, I think over time we've done around 200.
Okay.
So a pretty small percentage.
Maybe like 1% or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so not that big of a deal maybe to have to control against.
Yeah.
And then how has COVID affected your programs and how have you adjusted to that?
Yeah, it has been a pretty significant impact because our town is a really tourism-driven economy. And so because there's been a lot less visitation during this time, our city enacted a recession plan that essentially eliminated our part-time positions. So we can't hire those positions again until the recession plan has been lifted. So right now it's just me and our other permanent full-time staff person. So we had to try to fill in over the summer for monitoring the code. So driving around town and looking for people that were violating the watering code. So that fell on us, which usually we don't have to jump into that. And then we do a ton of, as I mentioned, a ton of public outreach. And so we've been trying to do some virtual things like we offer water checkups, which are like looking around a person's house, helping them look for leaks, checking to see if their toilet's running. So we've been trying to do those in a virtual platform. But we just have had a lot less participation in that kind of like general public interaction. And even for promoting things like our commercial rebates, usually we would go in and meet the business owner in person and try to work with them on changes. And some of the businesses aren't really operating in the same way they have before because that maybe they're a restaurant that's not doing, indoor dining. So I think it's been a pretty significant reduction in a lot of our programming. And we've just been using the time to try to do planning and cleaning up and getting, things in order for the future. But as it continues to stretch, I think that we're having to come up with innovative ways to try to bring people into some of our programming, in a virtual way or over the phone, or we're kind of figuring out how do you get creative when you're doing a very public facing position like this during a pandemic.
Definitely. Okay, great. Well, it looks like that was all the questions we had. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Lawless, and we'll go ahead and turn it over to Denise to wrap things up for us today.
Nice
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Dr. Lawless.